We're live in 3, 2...
We are back at it again. LeatherBrainz here, and it is a wild card weekend recap. I'm not alone. It's Slapdog here, baby. And I have today joined with me Scotty Del Rey. Alan is gone yet again. He decided to go to Disney World and not take his two favorite children, Scotty and myself, with him. And then this week he's gone as well. So we're on another show without Alan. We're going to miss him greatly, but we're going to talk football regardless because that's what we do here at LeatherBrainz. So there are Mikes who are in and out for football, so we'll chat about that. Saquon Barkley, he's lame. He's a lame dog. We'll chat about that. And the future of the Bucs is kind of an interesting one. We will chat about that so much more. But before we do, we have got to give a shout out to the people who keep these lights on. Erica's Healthy Pets. Okay, whether it be cheesy bites, turkey jerky, beef liver chews, there's puppy balm, and so much more. Go check out ericashealthypet.com and use code LB20. You're going to get 20% off your entire order. You want to place $400 worth of pet products? Do it. And you're going to get 20% off, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing. It's a great deal. Go check out ericashealthypet.com. Use code LB20. Get 20% off. Go check it out. If you enjoy any of the content we're producing, you would be supporting the show tremendously and or all the other projects we got going on tremendously. If you go to ericashealthypet.com, use code LB20, 20% off. Scotty, wildcard weekend, baby. Texans and Chargers, we will start there. The Texans win this game 32-12. And Scotty, I'm not going to take my hat off because then I would have to take my headphones off, but I do want to take my hat off to you because what you were saying all year about the Chargers kind of came into fruition here in this game. I mean, this was a really not a fun game to watch. Obviously, 32-12. The score speaks for itself about how unentertaining this was. But the Chargers really showed themselves. The Chargers are asses. You've been said all year long, and I think they really showed their true colors here in this game.
Yeah, you say it wasn't fun to watch. I completely disagree with that. I mean, it was very fun to watch Justin Herbert just totally collapse yet again in the playoffs. And listen, I think it's a lot of people pile on Justin Herbert because everyone says half the country says he's a great quarterback and the other half says, well, what the fuck has he ever done? And I'm kind of in the former half. Like, I do think Justin Herbert is a good quarterback. I just think the Chargers have never had enough personnel to take the next step. I mean, they've always been just kind of fighting. You know, they've had a ton of injuries. And yeah, they had Keenan Allen for a while. He was injured all the time. They had Mike Williams for a while. He was injured all the time. So, like, even when they had more receivers on this roster that can potentially bolster Justin Herbert, they just weren't able to stay on the field. So it's like, it's just kind of been one thing after another for this Chargers team that has kept them from taking the step forward. But yeah, this whole season, I've said the same thing, that the Chargers are overrated. And a lot of people argue with me on that because, you know, nobody was expecting the Chargers to win the Super Bowl. Coming into the season, people weren't really sure what to expect, but I just kept hearing over and over and over again, well, look at this team now. They got Harbaugh. Like, they're going to focus on the running game. They got Joe Alt. They're going to be able to dominate on the ground and really build and it's like, no, like, none of that is actually true. Everyone was saying it all season long. Like, they're taking these big steps in the right direction. It's like, yeah, I think they are better off now than they were last year, and they've got a competent head coach, and they're moving in the right direction, certainly. But we have not seen that step. And this is a team, maybe the way to summarize all of this very quickly is this is a team that was not a playoff caliber team, period. And their record indicated that they might be because their record was so easy through the first 10 weeks of the season. They were playing teams that were barely playing football and winning those games, to their credit. Like, you have to win those games. But they won those games, and then everyone's like, oh, they're going to be a playoff team. Look at this big step. It's like, okay, first of all, this was a playoff team 2 years ago. It's not like we're talking about the Broncos. The Broncos, you can say, despite their, result, which we'll talk about, you could say they are definitively a much better team, and they're moving in the right direction because they hadn't been to the playoffs in 10 years. The Chargers have been lingering in this area for a while, and they haven't taken a step forward. It's the same exact situation. Now, again, they're moving in the right direction, I think. I think Harbaugh's a good addition. I think they got a lot of cap space to play with this offseason. They can be a contender going forward. But this season, they had just been overrated all year long, and this performance is exactly what you expect with, from a quarterback who just doesn't have a ton of weapons. Ladd McConkey had like 200 yards receiving, and that's great. But he's the only option. Like, they got no running game going because they got down early. They only had Lad McConkey to throw to, and Justin Herbert was forcing stuff because he had to, and 4 interceptions later, they lose in their first playoff game yet again.
Well, and, I'm glad we're talking about Justin Herbert because I think that's really the point of conversation here amongst Chargers fans as well as just general NFL fans. What is Justin Herbert, right? I mean, he's gone to the playoffs twice now. Hasn't made it very far in either of his playoff bouts. He threw 4 interceptions in this game, just like you mentioned. And so what is Justin Herbert a good quarterback? That's the conversation that's kind of being touted around right now in NFL spaces, and I think it warrants that conversation because it wasn't a great game. And he has had weapons in the past. You mentioned Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. He had Austin Eckler, and I would argue that was probably at the peak of what this Chargers team was, and they didn't do anything with it, right? So, like, what is Justin Herbert in your mind? You look at him, and this is my personal opinion, but you watch Justin Herbert on the field. He looks good, right? He has the attributes that you would want from a quarterback, but he hasn't gotten it done, right? And so that's been the conversation that has constantly been had with Justin Herbert. And here we are another year later, and I didn't have the Chargers going to the playoffs this year. So I think all things considered, this is probably a win for them to even get this far. I expected this game to be closer because the Texans didn't have any of their wide receivers aside from Nico Collins. And so I thought that there was a chance that the Chargers could compete in this game. Shame on me for how wrong I was in that regard. But what is Justin Herbert in your mind? Is he a good quarterback? Is he a Super Bowl caliber quarterback that could maybe one day take this Chargers organization to the Super Bowl? Or is he just a decent quarterback that's never going to make it all the way?
I think if you put Justin Herbert on the Vikings or you put Justin Herbert on the Bengals, we're talking about him in the MVP conversation. I think he is talented enough to find success when he's got a lot of talent around him. And that's part of that has played out a little bit throughout his career because great quarterbacks just have the ability to elevate their team. Even if they don't have a lot of, they kind of are playing with a lot of no names, like they have the ability to elevate their team. Justin Herbert hasn't really been able to do that. One could argue that making it to the playoffs by itself with this team as brand new head coach, not a lot of weapons, like that is kind of, playing in his favor a little bit. But ultimately, he is good enough that if you gave him a solid roster around him, a solid offense around him, I think he could be great. It's just he might need the perfect situation in order to prove that. And I don't know if he's ever going to get that. Maybe next year will be the real test, the real final test for Justin Herbert because they have a lot of cap space. They have Jim Harbaugh, right? They have their coach. You were talking about with Austin Eckler and Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. Like that might have been the best roster that the Chargers team had, but Brandon Staley was their head coach. Like,
sure.
Do we have any reason to believe that he is capable of fostering a successful team environment? And we don't really have any reason to believe that. So it's always been like one thing or another that's been limiting Justin Herbert. And maybe next year it'll finally be the time to take the step forward. But I'll tell you right now, Chargers fans are sick and tired of saying maybe next year.
Yeah, and I think that's really what it boils down to is you can see what the talent of Justin Herbert is, but it's a constant revolving door of maybe next year. And that's got to get exhausting. I'm not saying cut ties with Justin Herbert because I think there's way worse quarterbacks that you could get out there, but it is exhausting. If I was a Chargers fan, I would be exhausted. This is not something you want to see. And you mentioned the Broncos, so let's talk about the Bills-Broncos game. I mean, that was another game that was pretty disappointing, and I don't want to sit here and say that I didn't expect it because I did, right? The Bills win this game 31-7 against the Broncos, I was watching this game, Scotty, and I don't ever think we really saw what the Bills are fully capable of in this game. They leaned incredibly heavy into the run game, and rightly so. I mean, James Cook, he averaged 5.2 yards per carry on 23 runs. Our boy Josh, he didn't have to play hero ball, right? All he had to do was hand the ball off to James Cook and let this offensive line get those blocks set, and James Cook ate, right? It looked like absolute dominance this entire game, and I don't think the Bills really showcased what they didn't have to get fancy. They didn't have to get crazy. They just had to hand the ball off, and they did really well. But I more than anything else, I want to talk about the Broncos because that's where I think the juice of this conversation lies. I think the Broncos are incredibly dangerous for years to come. That I really do. Bo Nix, he might be my favorite quarterback to come out of this rookie class of all the quarterbacks. Bo Nix is a really good quarterback, and I know the score is not indicative of that, but his performance and play style this entire season has been incredible. Like it far outproduced my expectations of what he was going to do and what the Broncos are going to do. I think if you get this young man some weapons, I would be pretty afraid to face the Broncos next season and for years to come if they get some talent surrounding him.
Yeah, it kind of sucks that the Broncos didn't compete better in this game, but ultimately, I mean, this is the result everyone expected. The Bills are pretty much a Super Bowl favorite at this point in time. Like they just seem like they're more dominant than pretty much everybody else in the AFC. Maybe just flatly everybody else in the AFC. So this is kind of what we expected, but when you were watching this game, the first half was like, it wasn't clean football, but it kept it pretty competitive. I mean, the Broncos were in it until the second half, even though they didn't put up a lot of points. The Broncos were just playing with house money. They shouldn't have made the playoffs. Nobody kind of expected that. There was a lot of question marks around this team, especially with the recent seasons that they've had. And the fact that they made the playoffs is a huge win for Broncos fans. And I'm way more sort of, I'm optimistic about the Chargers too, but I'm way more optimistic about the Broncos because of just the degree to which we saw Bo Nix is capable of elevating his team. And this is a roster that, their defense, yes, has played well for a lot of the year, but this is a roster that just should not be competing with the Bills at all. And obviously, they didn't. But they shouldn't be even on the same level. And the fact that they're playing each other in the playoffs is an indication that the Broncos overperformed expectations. And that's really good for Broncos fans. So it does suck that it wasn't a closer game, but ultimately, if you're a Broncos fan, you're happy. You made the playoffs for the first time in 9 years. You have a quarterback that you have faith in. You have a head coach now that you have faith in. And it's just about making the right moves for the coming years to be competitive. And I think they probably will do that.
So I got to ask you this. If you had to pick a franchise quarterback right now, would you rather have Justin Herbert or Bo Nix?
I'd still rather have Justin Herbert. I think Justin Herbert has proven, granted, we've talked about the lack of success, but there's just more of a sample size with Justin Herbert of him making great plays. And ultimately, we all should be excited about Bo Nix because what we saw from him this year was it was stellar. He played very well, but it's still only one season. And we've seen time and time again in the NFL how somebody comes out and they look pretty good, and then all of a sudden you just kind of never hear from them again. And that does happen. So I still think I would take Justin Herbert. But Bo Nix, with every season that he's looking like this, he's going to be more and more and more in that conversation.
I'm taking Bo Nix. I'm just going to say it. I would take Bo Nix if I was. I oftentimes struggle myself if I want to go find a new quarterback for the team that I support, and I don't have any say in that. But I think I would take Bo Nix, man. He throws a great ball. He's mobile with his legs. His decision making is pretty great. I think he is. He's going to be a problem for Chiefs fans, Chargers, Raiders. I do think that's going to. Bo Nix is going to be a very, very good quarterback, and I'd take him over Justin Herbert right now. I really would, and that's no detriment to Justin Herbert. I think if anything else, it's more of a how much I have faith in Bo Nix and his ability to get it done. Sean Payton, you're a scumbag, but you know what? You are a good head coach, and you've proven that this year. So,
yeah,
tough. Ravens Steelers. This game was it's a divisional matchup, right? It's wild card weekend. I was excited for this game, and there were a couple things that I kind of want to talk about. We'll start with Najee Harris. He was asked about the media attention leading up to this game and all the media scrutiny that the Steelers have been under these last few weeks. And this is what Najee had to say. He said, the guys have been saying things in the locker room that he didn't necessarily want to say on the camera, but he felt like throughout the losing streak for the Steelers for the last few weeks leading up to this game, a lot of the guys were letting what the media was saying infiltrate the locker room, and he wanted to see how they responded on Saturday. We saw it, Scotty. The Steelers lost this game 14-28 against the Ravens. God, the Steelers, man. I think it is a requirement that the Steelers have at least one unhinged player on their roster at all times. George Pickens was asked after the game, do you still believe in this team? And he said, yes. And then they said, do you want to be here? And he goes, absolutely not, no. It's what is going
insane. He was like, yeah, I think we're moving in the right direction, all this stuff, and making the right steps. And then they're like, okay, does that give you more confidence in the future? And he just said, nah.
What? Okay. What are you talking about?
Yeah, no, the Steelers they're weird. And the conversation around Mike Tomlin is also weird. But, if you listen to this podcast, I've said this before, that I really do think that Mike Tomlin's success has been the Steelers' failure to a certain degree. Because yes, Mike Tomlin has always outperformed what he should perform, pretty much. Like, save maybe the years with Big Ben. They had a quarterback that was clearly capable, but like especially recently, you're talking about Mitch Trubisky and Justin Fields and Russell Wilson. Like you're talking about quarterbacks that are just okay, and an offense
I think that's kind,
just okay.
By the way.
Yeah, and the thing is, because he has always had a 500 season or a little bit better than a 500 season, they've never really been in a position as a franchise to rebuild. And it's like the success that he's had with sort of dilapidated rosters has bit them in the ass a little bit because, they can say, we made the playoffs, or whatever. We haven't had a losing season in 20 years. But what has that gotten you? And the answer is nothing. And I think it's just so difficult because as a Steelers organization, you're like, well, he's having success.
He's winning games.
Like, do we want to make a change? But at some point you have to be like, well, we might have to take a few hard years in order to really set ourselves up to be a dominant franchise at some point in the future. And if we never do that, it's never going to happen.
Well, in Mike Tomlin's regular season record, he's 183, 107, and 2. So, like, that's a great regular season record. His postseason record, however, is 8 and 11, right? So that kind of leads into what you're stating of, like, they get to the dance, and then they fail more often than not, right? So, is Tomlin's seat warming up here? Because, kind of what you were alluding to is Steelers fans are kind of calling for his departure after this loss. They're frustrated with the fact that they're just good enough, but they've never kind of gotten to the finale. They've never gotten to the final dance. But he always finds a way to get to the playoffs or go over 500. And so it makes it really, really difficult for a team to be able to find success when you don't have the draft capital to go get a guy that you need in order. And we're kind of alluding to a quarterback here, right? Like Ben Roethlisberger, after his departure, it's just been kind of, we'll figure it out as we go. And that's really what the Steelers have done. And they've still found success. And I think that speaks to how great of a coach Tomlin is, but you're kind of constantly stuck in this rut. So in your mind, do you think that the Steelers should move on from Mike Tomlin?
Yeah, I mean, at this point in time, if I'm a Steelers fan, what else can you do? I mean, you can't just continue to do this and have a barely winning season and never make any progress. And it really sucks moving on from Mike Tomlin because he's capable. I think I would choose Mike Tomlin over damn near every coach in the NFL if I had to choose. Like, he is that good. And I love the way he treats the players. I love the way he treats the media. It's clear that he's able to get the best out of his team. But at some point in time, you've got to make a change. And if not now, then when? I mean, how much longer are you going to do this? Unless they happen upon somebody who completely turns their team around, like Mike Tomlin is just going to be in this position indefinitely forever. So I think it's probably time because, why are you kicking the can down the road? Let's make a decision and run with it. And worst case scenario, you get a bad coach who sucks for a few years, and guess what? Maybe that lets you build up a roster finally.
I don't know if I would. This one is, it's just such a difficult, because I do think Mike Tomlin is a top 5 coach in the NFL. Like, so instead of sitting here putting the blame on Mike Tomlin, maybe you put some of the blame on the front office, right? Like, if you know that your quarterback, and I think the quarterback position is one that is the very glaring hole for this team, right? And it's like, well, Kenny Pickett wasn't the answer. We didn't have the draft capital to go get somebody else. Why don't you make some moves? Why don't you, hey, we'll trade you 3 first-round picks. We want to move up in the draft. Like, why don't you sell some future assets, go attempt to get a guy that could potentially change the franchise from an offensive standpoint to be able to get the job done? Like, that's kind of where my mind goes is, I get it. You're frustrated with the results that Tomlin's given you where he's just good enough, but maybe you need to just mortgage the house, put a second mortgage on the house and go get yourself the guy that you need in order to get you over that hump. And the Steelers really haven't done that. They just keep saying, well, we got a pick here. We'll just wait and see who falls to us and we'll grab who we need. And it's like, that's not working. So yeah. I don't know if moving on from Tomlin is the right answer in my mind, because I look at the coaching prospects right now and I'm like, who are you going to find that's better? Right. And that's just a difficult pill for me to swallow. And as somebody who is not a Steelers fan, but if I was, like, I would take Tomlin on my team over what we currently have.
Yeah, the only problem with that thought process is when if you're making huge moves with the front office to try and acquire players, there's no guarantee that's going to work out anyway. Sure. So you might end up having to get rid of Tomlin and then also put your franchise in huge debt. Whereas you can look at it from the perspective of Tomlin's been doing this for 20 years. Like, who knows, like, not saying that he wants to retire anytime soon, but who knows how long he sees himself, being a head coach. He's been doing it for a long time. And so it might just be better to cut ties and say, all right, we're just going to start from scratch. And yeah, you should still make big moves in the offseason, but that sort of gives everyone the right perspective that, hey, we're starting from scratch here, and we're going to try and build something, and it gives everyone a little bit more patience. It's a similar conversation to the Cowboys, like where the big difference is the Cowboys in recent history have been dominant in the regular season, which you could have never said about the Steelers recently. But it's the same sort of result that they make it to the playoffs and then everything fizzles out. And the reason that we've seen a few more head coaches go to Dallas and changes there is just because the playoff performance is so underwhelming compared to what the expectation is. But Steelers fans don't even have expectations. You can't have expectations with this roster. Like, you're just like, well, hopefully we make the playoffs and we get lucky and just see what happens. And that's just no way to move a franchise forward. I think you just have to start making drastic decisions at this point.
I think we've talked about this on prior episodes, but in my mind, I think a lot of it comes down to culture. Like, I really do. And that's not saying Tomlin has bad culture, but I think he as I kind of joked around at the beginning of this, he kind of has some nutcases that are constantly on the offensive side of the ball. Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell, George Pickens, Deontay Johnson. Like, there's no continuity on that offense. Like, I don't get the impression, and granted, I'm not in the locker room, but I don't get the impression that people from the offensive side of the ball have really bought into what Tomlin is selling. And I think that's kind of been the mantra the last few years. And so you look at, and we'll talk about the Commanders and that game in a little bit, but Dan Quinn kind of comes to mind for, like, he really changed the culture, and he's gotten players that are bought into what he's selling from a cultural perspective. Dan Campbell and the Lions, like, he surrounded himself with just dogs, guys that, like, are buying into the mantra that, and this is Dan Campbell specifically with the Lions, but, like, we are going to chew on people's kneecaps. We are going to be super aggressive. We are going to be, like, these very physical, don't give a shit, like, come out and just give it our 100%. And that, you can see that across the ball, whether it's offense or defense. Like, that is just the mantra of that team. And you look at the offensive side of the ball for the Steelers, and it's like you just have a bunch of people out there that are playing the sport of football, but, like, there's no passion behind it. There's no, like, we're all in this together as a team. I think the defensive side of the ball, you have people like TJ Watt and some of the D-backs that play for the Steelers that are kind of bought into what Tomlin is selling, and I think that's why Tomlin's defense is so dang good. I just don't think you have anybody that, from an offensive standpoint, that's also bought into that culture of, like, what Tomlin is selling. And I think that's also been a detriment to their success.
Well, culture is kind of an interesting conversation generally, because I think as fans, we tend to, it's like a chicken or egg conversation where we look at, like, the Lions as a peak example. And I actually think the Commanders is also a peak example. Like, wow, Dan Campbell showed up, and now the culture is completely different. It's like, okay, well, Dan Campbell showed up, and they got, like, 14 star players that are really, really good at football. So It's like, okay, did Dan Campbell create the culture, or did the talent on the team capable of winning allow people the opportunity to buy into something? And I think same thing could be said with Dan Quinn a little bit. Yeah, you could say he changed the culture, or you can say, well, they got Jaden Daniels, who's going to win Rookie of the Year, and he's playing out of his mind, and he's electric. So that gets people pretty excited. And so it's easy to be optimistic about the future. And again, you just don't have, like, Tomlin could build I don't think there's anyone who seriously says Tomlin can't build a culture. I think that's one of the things that people like the most about him. I just think it's very difficult to build a culture when you have a lackluster roster, and it's very easy to build a culture when you have a great roster. A lot of that actually comes down to the front office more so than the head coach, in my opinion.
Well, and that's kind of what I was alluding to, was, like, I think the front office could definitely play a part in some of their failure to succeed at at a farther level in which Tomlin's been able to succeed at, because they got
Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, so they're doing a lot.
Well, yeah, that is very evident here as the Steelers were knocked out in the wild card weekend. So I don't know. I mean, all's to say, if you were a Steelers fan, would you want to move on from Tomlin?
I think so. I think it's time. And it's not that I want to. I just think it's time. I just don't I don't see another path forward with them because, like you said, I mean, the alternative is saying, okay, we're done fooling around. We're going to make some serious moves. And then there's a chance that doesn't pan. Like, especially if you trade up in the draft, like you trade a bunch of draft capital to draft a rookie quarterback. Who knows? Who knows how that's going to turn out? And then you might end up having to let Tomlin go anyway. So it's like,
yeah, but I don't know. If I was to choose, I would say no. I would say give him the opportunity, mortgage the house, go get your guy, and if you fail, then we have something to point at and say, this was your downfall, right? But you're winning seasons, you getting us to the playoffs consistently and then losing in the first round, like, yeah, that sucks, but once again, you made it to the dance, right? So yeah. I would be willing, a trade that comes to mind is the 49ers, right? They traded 3 first-round picks to go get Trey Lance, and, a couple years later, they traded him for a 5th-round pick to the Cowboys, and he chills on the bench, right? And the 49ers, I mean, this year, due to injuries, I think more than anything else, they didn't, make it, but they figured it out, right? And they did mortgage the house.
They figured it out with the miraculous pick of Brock Purdy that literally every other GM in the league passed up on. Like, I just don't think that's a strategy you can really rely on. To me, it's, and granted, I mean, keeping Tomlin on the team is not a bad option, obviously, because I think both you and I agree that Tomlin is a great coach, and I think he deserves to be there. But at the end of the day, it's like when you're taking your risk assessment into account, like, okay, let's just move on. This guy, like Max, he's not going to coach with the Steelers for another 10 years. I mean, it's just not going to happen.
You don't know.
So
he's young.
He's relatively young, but like I just don't see that as a legitimate possibility. So it's like at some point in the relatively near future, you're going to have to get rid of, or Tomlin's going to move on, whether it's he retires or wants to do something else. 52. And so it's like, yeah, why not cut ties now and start fresh and start actually building something? Because the alternative is you keep Tomlin around, and in all likelihood, this is just going to be it's like we're living in a weird repeat of reality, and it's just the same thing over and over and over and over again, and that's a great way to lose your fandom.
Get me a quarterback. If Tomlin fails, I'm off the Tomlin train, but I'm still riding it right now. And if they do fire Mike Tomlin, I welcome you with open arms over at the Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah, that'd be a sweet acquisition.
Hey man, I'll take almost anything at this point. Eagles win against the Packers 22-10. I will start with AJ Brown reading on the sideline. He was
cool.
Did you see this? He was reading a book on the bench during the game, and AJ Brown was asked about it. He claims he was reading a book called Inner Excellence: Train Your Mind for Extraordinary Performance and the Best Possible Life. He was reading this in the second half of this game, and he claims that he needs to make sure his mental health is good and is, quote, how he refreshes after every drive. Regardless of if he scores a touchdown or drops a pass, he always goes back to that book every drive and just refocuses, and then nothing else matters. What does matter, AJ Brown? 1 reception for 10 yards in a playoff game against the Packers, because that was your stat line this game. What are you doing? What in the hell are you? You're literally sitting on the bench reading a book. And Jalen Hurts was asked, he's like, hey, like, is AJ Brown, is this like, have you heard of him reading the book? And Jalen Hurts was like, yeah, he carries it around with him. But it's like, in a playoff game, dude, what are you doing?
Yeah, I don't know. It's definitely kind of a red flag. I mean, if you are so, mental health, obviously everyone now takes this very seriously. But if you are so mentally unstable that you have to carry around your emotional support book in order to function, like that's not a good sign for what's going on in your head. And I don't know, his performance, I think this is sort of indicative of, it goes back to Jalen Hurts too. Jalen Hurts is perfectly fine having bad games because they have Saquon Barkley. And that's just because this Eagles team with Saquon Barkley is so good that if Jalen Hurts is, throwing for under 50% completion rate and he finishes the game with 150 yards passing, not really a big deal because they can lean on Saquon so heavily. And the same goes with the receivers. Not all of their stars have to have a breakout game every week. It's just got to be kind of 1 or 2 of them. And the Eagles have proven throughout the season that that's pretty much all it takes. And they have enough weapons and enough pieces in place that really they only need one of them to have a spectacular game to dominate a game. And they've done it all season long, and this is just another example of it.
Why are you reading a book on the sideline, man?
Yeah, I mean, it is pretty silly.
It's ridiculous. And you're right. I think this team is definitely You think the Eagles make the playoffs if they don't have Saquon? Because I
It's
lean towards no.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, they're a way, way, way worse. We saw them collapse last year with pretty much the same roster minus Saquon. And that, like, Saquon is just such a, like, we cannot understate the difference that he makes on this team. But, you know, we can play hypotheticals all day long. Doesn't matter.
Sure.
They have Saquon. And Saquon is having a career year. And when he's on the field, it's like, anything is possible with this Eagles team.
I don't love it. I don't. I mean, I love Saquon. I think he's first off, I think he's too humble. He's way too fucking humble. Dude, you had a touchdown. You broke away, and then you could have just ran it in, and you decided to slide just to win the game. What a loser. Run the fucking ball into the end zone, okay? That's what you're here to do. I want to see you score. Your fans want to see you score. All those degenerates out there that are betting on you to score want to see you score. Come on, man. Just run the ball in for the touchdown. Like, stop being this humble, nice guy. Just run the ball into the end zone. Like, we all know that you are very... You could have taken it to the house easily. So, shame on you, Saquon. Be better. Just run it in. Just rack up the score. Don't slide to, you don't want to get injured or you just want to run the clock out and not take any chances. Who cares? Run the damn ball in. Just stop being too nice. That's just gross.
I think this is a mindset of someone who is not a fan of a star player, because I can speak from experience. Whenever Patrick Mahomes has the ball in his hand, I have heart palpitations. I'm like, do not touch my quarterback. I want him in a bubble. I do not want anyone laying hands on him. And when Saquon, obviously he's got to get tackled throughout the game, but when it doesn't matter, no, don't do anything, Saquon.
He wouldn't have got tackled.
Down. You lay a pillow down. Like, I don't want you getting tripped up. I don't want you. God knows. Like, just please stay safe. And that's all Eagles fans are saying. They don't give a shit about the touchdown. They just want Saquon to stay safe for the divisional round.
I want you to score touchdowns because it's way more fun to watch. Man, this was a tough one for the Packers, though, too. I mean, Jordan Love threw 3 interceptions. They were down to just 3 active wide receivers on the roster after they lost Jaden Reed in this game. They lost Christian Watson a few weeks ago to a torn ACL. Kind of sucks, right? Like, in the Packers, I kind of am looking at, like, I think the Packers are always going to be competitive as long as they have LaFleur, and Jordan Love, he's proven himself to be a very competent quarterback. So what do the Packers need to do to improve their chances next year in your mind?
Stay healthy. I think they have a very similar story to the 49ers this year, to a little bit lesser of a degree, but this is a team that's, since Jordan Love got injured on week 1, like this is a team that had to ride with a backup quarterback and backup receivers, and like it's just been all year long, just injury after injury after injury, and it sucks. It happens. It's professional football. People get injured, but the cards just didn't fall their way this time. And ultimately, I still have a lot of faith in this Green Bay team. I think they proved that they are absolutely competitive, one of the best teams in the NFC when they're all healthy. It's just they weren't ever really all healthy, and it all just came to a head in this game. I'm still buying a lot of stock in this team. I think this is a team that can win the Super Bowl within the next 5 years.
I don't know if I'm buying a lot of stock in Christian Watson. I think the team probably needs to go get another wide receiver. The dude just constantly hurt. I mean, like, that's been his mantra since he's been in the NFL. It's just like he's just constantly hurt. And I agree with you, by the way. I think that this team is largely I like the comparison to the 49ers because they were hurt for a lot of the season, and they obviously still found a way to limp into the playoffs, and we saw it come to fruition here. But I think I think Christian Watson is he's too injury prone. I think you need to go get yourself another wide receiver that's able to get it done, because I don't know if Watson's going to be the answer for you.
That's one of the things that's been so spectacular about this Green Bay team, though. Injuries aside, none of these receivers are proven. I mean, they've all sort of proven themselves with Jordan Love, but it's like when we saw this roster first, Jordan Love's taken over. They have a lot of young receivers, not really any household names. It's like, what is this going to look like? And they've been dominant when they're healthy. Like, they've been dominant. And so I think it just goes to show maybe how good LaFleur is, how good Jordan Love is, that they've been able to elevate everybody on this roster to an extreme level. Like, they are playing really, really good football when they're healthy. So, I don't necessarily disagree. I think it might be worth pursuing, someone like T. Higgins or whatever, like whoever might be available for you. If you can get a high caliber wide receiver, you're just going to be that much better. But I still think it's very impressive what this Packers team has done with a lot of sort of unproven weapons. And they proved this year. I mean, if they're all healthy, again, they're one of the best teams in the NFC. They're right up there with the Lions and the Vikings and the Eagles. Like, they're in that conversation, absolutely. So, I don't know. I still have a lot of faith that they're going to be good for years and years to come. And they've just somehow, for my entire life, have never been without a quarterback, which is pretty annoying. But they pull it off. They always pull it off.
They do. A team who found the quarterback this year was the Commanders, and they won this game 23-20 against the Bucs. This is what playoff football should be, Scotty. This game right here this is what I was hoping a lot of these games were going to be, and it turned out it was mostly just this game. Like, this was a fun game. And we talked about this game last week going into this game, and we said we wouldn't be surprised if either team won. And I had the Commanders winning this game. It was a close game, but this is what playoff football should be. Like, it should be close. It should be crazy. It should be, we don't know who's going to win this game exactly, and we could expect either team to come out and win. But what a storyline for the Commanders, man. Like, Jaden Daniels, you talked about him just a little bit earlier and how he's got the Rookie of the Year pretty much on lock. We kind of talked about Dan Quinn and the culture aspect of this thing, but really what I kind of want to focus on here is the Commanders obviously are going to move on, and we'll talk about all the games coming up here, but I want to talk about the Bucs, because the Bucs are kind of in a weird spot. So my question is, where do the Bucs go from here after losing this game? Because you have Baker Mayfield, and he's still under contract for next season, but the Bucs do have a potential out with Mike Evans this offseason, or if they choose to keep him around, they'd be on the line he would take a cap hit of $26 million, that is quite a bit of money. And the cap isn't real, by the way, but that is a real number, and it will, take a good chunk of change to keep him around. And I bring this up, Mike Evans is going to be 32 this next season, and he hit another 1,000-yard season, his 11th straight in a row, and he showed no signs of slowing down. But all it takes is really just one twisted ankle, and we could see their next season decline rather rapidly, in my opinion. Is it time for the Bucs to start thinking about the future, or do they just kind of let next year play out, keep Mike Evans, and then maybe try and draft a quarterback if they have a lackluster season next year? Is that kind of where your mind is at, or what are your thoughts on the Bucs?
Yeah, I mean, the first thought that comes to mind is this is a team that played pretty well in a lot of their games. I don't think that they are under the impression that they're going to be competing for a Super Bowl with Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans. I don't think that's realistic. But they're still fun. They got Baker Mayfield for another year. They can kind of see where things play out. I love Baker, but I still kind of am left with the feeling that he's not a franchise quarterback, that he's not someone you're going to pay him on a 7-year or 10-year deal. Like, I just don't think that's going to happen with Baker. So part of me is like, yeah, just play it out. He's got one more year. Mike Evans is getting older. See how much juice you can squeeze out of this and then go from there. But the other part of me is like, well, if you're going to do that anyway, like you're kind of obviously Mike Evans isn't going to be around forever. So you're expecting him to move on at some point in time, whether it's by his choice or yours. I don't know if Baker Mayfield's a franchise quarterback. I really don't have a lot of faith in Todd Bowles. I have not seen anything from him that indicates that he is someone that's capable of leading a team to the ultimate success. And so I'm looking at all these things, and it's like, well, Mike Evans had another 1,000-yard year. You think you can trade him for anything? Like, there are teams that would love to have Mike Evans, even though he's old. And so part of me is like, well, might be worth pulling the trigger here pretty soon, but I don't think that they will. I think they're going to play it all out for another year. We'll see what Mike Evans, we talked about some trade rumors with him last year, so maybe that comes up again. But I think there's a decent chance that we see pretty much the same Bucs team back next year, and then they kind of hit the restart button from there.
I could see a Devontae Adams-esque situation play out here next season where they come out. I think they're always. I think they'll be even competitive next year. Like, you're gonna have Baker and Mike if he stays healthy. Like, they're gonna kind of be winning games. But I would hope the organization and the front office would have enough wherewithal to understand the predicament that they're in. And I don't want to sit here and claim that everybody is intelligent like we are. I know we are galaxy brains here. Probably some of the smartest people on planet Earth, really. But I don't know. I would move on from Mike Evans. I would try and trade him, just like you mentioned, because teams will pay quite a pretty penny for him. The Broncos come to mind. T. Higgins is a free agent, so like they're the Patriots. Maybe Mike Evans to the Patriots. I don't know, because there's not a lot of great free agent wide receivers. T. Higgins, like I mentioned, is kind of like the most highly touted this offseason, and then it's we don't even know if he's going to be a free agent. Sure, we don't. And then you kind of have D-Hop and Hollywood Brown. D-Hop's another aging wide receiver. Hollywood coming back from injury, and they're both kind of on one-year deals. So what happens to them? Like, there's just not a lot of really great wide receivers that are about to hit free agency. I think you could sell Mike Evans, and he still has, gas left in the tank and something to offer to a team that kind of needs him. But I don't know if the Bucs are going to get over that hump, and so I would kind of maybe look at moving on from him. That's my take.
And I think another, I'm going to play pocket psychologist here because I don't know what any of these people are actually thinking. But part of me is like, yeah, Mike Evans wants to go chase a ring in the latter part of his career. But the other part of me is like, this guy, more than almost anybody, has had this carousel of quarterbacks. And he finally has a little bit of consistency here with Baker Mayfield. And part of me is like, maybe he isn't as interested about trying to go to a contender, and he just wants to play out his career, maybe end with another 1,000-yard season. He knows he's got an opportunity to do that with Baker Mayfield. They know each other well. They get along. I just don't know if he really wants to leave. And he's in Florida. He's enjoying the weather. Like he doesn't want to go spend a winter in New England and deal with whatever shit show that might end up being. So it's like, I don't know. I just really don't know what to expect.
That's a good point too. And it's not like he is ring chasing, right? He got that with Tom Brady, so he's got a Super Bowl ring. Like he's done the deed, so to speak. So maybe he doesn't want to, and I don't think he has a no trade clause necessarily because the team could just say, "Hey, appreciate what you've done." I don't think they would because I think he means too much to that team and that city.
That's why I think all this is just kind of coming back to run it back one more year, decide what to do from there. Because it just seems like if he doesn't really want to leave and they don't really know what they're going to get for him and they don't really know what their next steps are, it's like let's maybe go into the 2025 season and just say, hey, we know that this is all coming to an end. We now have an entire season to plan for that, and let's try and give Mike Evans another 1,000-yard year. Let's try and make Baker Mayfield look good. Maybe look for some new head coaches, and then we'll cross this bridge when we come to it and just kind of lay low for now.
I think that's the most probable situation, but it's fun to talk about. It's fun to try and play 3D chess and get ahead of things and see what could be, and that's why we have these conversations here. Last thing to note on this game is it's safe to say Rachaad White isn't coming back. It's Bucky Irving next season. I mean, Bucky Irving he's the guy. So any Rachaad White owners in Dynasty football, sorry, he's dead. He's dead in the water. Vikings versus the Rams. Scotty, this game has not happened yet, admittedly, because we are recording on Monday before the game. But a couple things to kind of talk about here. First and foremost, prayers to all the families that are dealing with the wildfires in California. That is absolutely terrible. Sad stuff going on there. So really tough to see. But hey, classy move by Michael Bidwell and the Arizona Cardinals to send two of our private jets. Yeah, we got private jets to pick up the Rams players and their families. I did think that was kind of cool. And Bidwell was kind of asked about it because the Rams are a division rival. And he said, hey, seems like the right thing to do. And I admire that. I think that's really, really cool. But I did want to say it does kind of suck that the game had to be moved just because the Rams would have had home field advantage, which would have been really nice. And, they're the next closest stadium, but it still kind of sucks. And, situation given it is what it is, and there's nothing you can do. But it does kind of suck for the Rams because
when you're in the playoffs and now you lose your home field advantage. I mean, you're gonna have a lot of fans who travel, especially given the situation. It's more than just football at this point in time. It's like this is something the community can kind of coalesce around and feel like there's purpose in it. So I expect there to be a packed house full of Rams fans, even though it's in a different state. But it does really suck. So I got to ask you. We talked about this game last week, and like you said, it hasn't happened yet. Our time. By the time you listen to it, it will have happened. But does the stadium change your outlook on the game? Because you picked the Rams to win.
I still got the Rams winning. I
now
really
they got
do.
kind of a storybook situation going.
They do a little bit. The Vikings, man. I think the Lions gave the playbook of what you need to do to beat the Vikings. And I think that Sean McVay is going to look very heavily into the film and see how did you shut down Justin Jefferson? How did you shut down Sam Darnold? Because if we can do both of those things, we're going to win this game. And I expect the Rams to win this game. I think it could be fun. And this is kind of going back to the Bucs Commanders game. This is a game where I wouldn't be surprised if either team wins, but I I'm going to put my stock in the Rams and Sean McVay to get this thing done. I think that, offensively, when they are humming, they're humming, man. Kyron Williams, absolutely electric. Puka Nacua, God, man, that kid is amazing. Cooper Kupp, when he's healthy, he's on the field. He's looked like he's slowing down a little bit, but he's still got some juice left to give. And so I think the Rams are going to win this game. I really do.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm still taking the Vikings. But like you said, I mean, this is a game that can go either way. It comes down to the matchup between the Rams offense and the Vikings defense, because the Vikings have the better defense in this matchup. And if they show up and they play their best ball, it's potentially, not even going to be close. But with that said, we haven't seen the best from the Rams offense over the last several weeks. And if they show up, I mean, they can put up points, and we know Matthew Stafford's got the pedigree to pull it off. So it'll be interesting. I kind of hope it turns into a shootout just for my own fun.
Me too.
But part of me is like, this Vikings defense is pissed off. They lost to the Lions. They know they should have been more competitive in this game or in that game. And I think they're going to kind of take it out on the Rams, and we might end up seeing the Vikings run away with this game.
All right. Well, time will tell. Obviously, like you mentioned, once y'all are listening, the game will have happened. So you can sit here and laugh and poke fun, but this is speculation before the game, so take it lightly on us. Let's talk about the coaching carousel. We talked about Mike Evans. There's a couple more Mikes to discuss, and we'll start with Mike Vrabel. He was announced as the new Patriots head coach. Scotty, are you okay? Are you shocked? I mean, this was probably the biggest news ever to break the NFL. Nobody saw Mike Vrabel go into the Patriots. This was something that I legitimately fell over out of my seat when I heard this, because I was so just taken aback. I could not believe that Mike Vrabel was going to the Patriots.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of confused on this. I don't know if you can shed any light, but the Rooney Rule is this rule that the NFL installed, that you have to interview a certain number of minority head coach candidates, right, to try and create equity in that area. But it seems like they fired a black guy and then hired a white guy immediately. Like, how many people did they interview between? Like, did they just break the rule? Does it not apply to the Patriots? I don't understand how this happened.
They tried to interview Aaron Glenn, who is the defensive coordinator for the Lions and is black, and he told him no, because he already knew. Like, he already knew. He goes,
right.
"Now this smells like a Rooney Rule where you want to interview me, but I don't. I know you're not interested in me. The entire world knows you want Mike Vrabel, so I'm not going to waste my time." And he didn't. And so I don't know the legalities of the Rooney Rule enough to sit here and walk you through this. I do know they did try and interview Aaron Glenn, and he said no, thank you.
Well, that's the big problem with the Rooney Rule. Ultimately, is like, if you're a black head coach and you're like, I've worked my whole life to be in a position where I could potentially be a coach in the NFL, and some idiot organization is just going to interview me because they have to. It's like, that's kind of insulting. Like, why? If I'm Mr. Glenn, I probably would have said the same thing. Like, no, go fuck off. You're not going to waste my time, and just go hire the guy you want. Yeah,
which I think, it's 2024 or 2025. Excuse me. Get your guy. And I understand the Rooney Rule is in place to try and stop racism and stuff like that. And I don't, like I said, I don't know the Rooney Rule well enough to walk us through it to the point of the legal standpoint. But like, yeah, I would feel like that was a slap in the face. And it's like, dude, you don't even want me. Like, I'm not going to sit here and waste my time doing this. And it's like, that's so stupid. Like, just go. Everybody knew it was Mike Vrabel. Mike Vrabel knew it was Mike Vrabel. Mike Vrabel, like, as soon as they fired Gerard Mayo because they knew it was going to be Vrabel. So it's like, everybody under the sun knew it, and it's like, why are you sitting here? Like, it is. I would feel like it was a slap in the face, because it's like, he's going to go waste his time doing an interview for a job that he knows he's not going to get because the job's already taken, right? It's so stupid. I do like the hire of Mike Vrabel, however, for the Patriots. I think Mike Vrabel is there are a couple coaching candidates that are really hot this offseason, and Vrabel definitely is the top of those charts, or within that conversation for sure. God, the Patriots still have a lot to figure out, though. I mean, they have a young quarterback who Drake May is going to be very good, I do believe. They have very, very favorable cap space coming into this offseason, so they need to go get they need to get a lot of guys. They have a high draft pick, so like, it is a really nice landing spot, because you have your franchise quarterback, you have a high draft pick, like, you have a lot to work with there, and Mike Vrabel is a very, very good head coach. So I think this was a great hire by the Patriots. I don't know if I'll ever root for the Patriots, just because they've had such a long dominance of Tom Brady and Belichick, and so it's kind of always, just growing up, I was like, man, I don't want the Patriots to win. So I don't know if that'll ever fully leave my mind. But I am excited for what the Patriots could be with Vrabel there. I think that was definitely the right move for them and the right fit for him as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a Patriots fan, you're very happy. You're happy with this whole season. I mean, even though you didn't win very many games, like you got a quarterback who looks pretty good, you got a new head coach that you feel pretty happy with, and we kind of do have to give a little bit of credit to the Patriots organization because Gerard Mayo was always kind of a strange hire, and their willingness to buy totally into this guy and then say, this isn't really working out, and make that decision quick. We see so many NFL organizations that just sit on and sit and sit and sit, and then they just never make any progress. So I think there is, something to be said, and maybe it's just because it was Vrabel, and Vrabel just seems like too good of an opportunity to pass up. But there is something to be said for their willingness to just say, rip the Band-Aid off, we're doing this now. I don't care what we said, last offseason, we're changing our minds, and we're going full steam ahead. I think more organizations need to be like that.
Well, I think there are a couple things that play into it. Obviously, Vrabel was a Patriots player back in the day, and so he knows about Robert Kraft. He knows the Patriot way, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the Gerard Mayo signing was not the right call. And I never thought it was the right call. Robert Kraft was like, I've been grooming this guy for 6 years, right? Like he was like, we knew that he was going to be Belichick's replacement. I don't buy that at all. I think that there was rumors going into last offseason before they made Mayo the head coach of him potentially interviewing for other head coaching candidates positions that were open, like the vacancies. And I think Kraft got scared and pulled the trigger because he just needed a guy. And he that's not to say he didn't believe in Mayo, but he wouldn't have been my first, second, or third choice. And so I think he got scared that somebody else was going to take him and maybe went all in too quick on him. But I do kind of like the fact that he just kind of what you mentioned, like they're not afraid to rip off the Band-Aid and say, okay, yep, we're going to move on. Like we want to go get our guy. And, Vrabel's too good of a deal to pass up. So I think there is something to be said there because, a lot of teams, we've talked a lot on the show about, we as fans can see when something's not working, and we're like, okay, this isn't working out. And teams who keep Doug Peterson, hey buddy, like, how did you survive the entire season and get canned at the very end? Like we knew in week 6, we're like, dude, get Doug Peterson out of here. This is not working well. And same thing for quarterbacks. Like we can tell when a quarterback's probably not going to be the future, and it's like, why are you continuing to roll out this terrible product every week? So, hey, kudos to the Patriots. Kudos to Robert Kraft. Congratulations to Mikey Vrabel. The Patriots are going to be an interesting offseason to watch because they could move on from that pick. I kind of expect them to maybe move down in the draft a little bit and maybe sell that pick to somebody else. So it's going to be really interesting to watch.
Yeah, the Patriots are going to be fun, I think, for a while. And I'm in the same boat. Like, I don't really want the Patriots to be good, but yeah. I do want to see Vrabel have some success. I do want to see what Drake May can do on an actual roster. So I'm excited for the future. And I know Patriots fans are like over the moon. Like this is best case scenario. Another
Mike conversation. Mikey McCarthy. He is out. Is the Cowboys head coach after his contract is up as of today, the 14th year. His contract was up. He had a 49-34 record with the Cowboys throughout the last 5 seasons. This one is really interesting to me. And I think I have an inkling of a feeling as to how this played out. Obviously, this is very fresh. The Band-Aid has been ripped off rather quickly, so there's a lot of conversation about Mike McCarthy. But I think Mike McCarthy wanted out. And I'm curious to know, do you think it was more of Mike McCarthy wanting to get out of the Cowboys or Jerry Jones not wanting to, pay him and given the situation here?
I don't know. It's probably a combination of both. Everybody kind of realizes that the Cowboys head coach, just like the Cowboys quarterback, is like uniquely criticized in the NFL for whatever reason. I mean, the Cowboys is just such a huge brand that when you're the coach or you're the quarterback, all eyes are sort of always on you. So it wouldn't surprise me if McCarthy's like, yeah, like get me the hell out of the situation. But part of me is like, I think we talk a lot of shit on Jerry Jones, and rightly so, because it's pretty fun to do. But maybe we start need to give him a little bit of kudos because so many people were like, he's not going to fire McCarthy. Even Jerry Jones was like, I'm not going to fire McCarthy. So I think everyone was like, he's going to do this again, where he just hangs on and hangs on and hangs on, and then until he's forced to make a decision. And this time he was like, nope, it's not working. we're moving on and figuring something else out. And I think that's positive. I think this is a positive change for the Cowboys. They need sort of a change of scenery to figure out what's going on. They just paid Dak, so they're going to be stuck with him. So they got to figure it out. And, getting a new head coach and some fresh eyes on the organization, I think it can only benefit them, especially after this last season, which was horrific.
I don't know if there's, and I'm not going to sit here and put Mike McCarthy on the highest of pedestals, but I think it's probably good that he got out too. I really do, because I think it was a very difficult spot to be in. I think it was, the front office, I think it was kind of on a weird trajectory, and I don't know what that looks like, and I would probably want to get off that ride as well. Do you think Mike McCarthy finds another head coaching gig this year? I mean, there's a couple different teams here that we're going to discuss here in just a moment. The Bears, Saints, Cowboys now, Jaguars, and the Raiders are kind of all still in the hunt for a head coach. Do you think he might fill one of these holes?
I don't think he's going to be anyone's first choice, but I think he's going to be on everyone's list. So it's just going to depend on how things play out. And whenever we see these coaching carousels, there are always some fresh faces come in from coordinator positions. Obviously we're all talking about Ben Johnson, but there are, a whole number of people that people aren't talking about that are going to be available and sought after. So it's tough to say if any of these teams are going to want McCarthy over some fresh blood and sort of take a risk. But he's certainly going to be in the conversation for all of these teams. And so it's sort of above my pay grade to predict how it's going to turn out. But I certainly think I would not be surprised if he ends up being a head coach next year. I also would not be surprised if he goes the Vrabel route and just kind of, finds a job in the interim and stays involved and then eventually gets an opportunity. So I guess we'll just have to see. But, if I'm someone like the Bears, if I'm someone like the Jaguars or the Raiders, I'm looking very seriously at Mike McCarthy. And he might not be the top of the list, but he's on the list.
Yeah, and I think, who's the number one choice for a head coach this offseason in your mind?
It's got to be Ben Johnson.
Okay, I agree with that.
He's got the highest upside.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. The Bears, Ben Johnson did interview with him. There's been a lot of chatter about how Ryan Poles is kind of afraid of Ben Johnson and the fact that, he's afraid that if he brings Ben Johnson in, Ben Johnson is going to out Ryan Poles. I don't think Ben Johnson goes to the Bears. I really don't.
I don't know.
I think, in my opinion, I think it's probably Cliff Kingsbury. And Cliff Kingsbury has not interviewed with the Bears yet. I think right now he's kind of focused on the Commanders and their run, but I think there's a chance it could be Cliff Kingsbury. I think the stars are kind of aligning in that way. I've also seen Brian Flores as a potential candidate, and that one could be interesting. I think that would be hilarious. As I've kind of said on the show before, I think if Brian Flores goes there, Caleb Williams is he's going to have to get some, acetone to take the nail polish off, because Brian Flores is not going to put up with that shit. We saw what he did with Tua, so I think it would be the most Bears move to go get him. It would be hilarious to watch all that unfold. But Cliff Kingsbury would be interesting. He's former head coach for the Cardinals. I think it could be interesting. Obviously, we've seen the Commanders and what Cliff is doing there with that offense, and obviously Jaden Daniels has looked amazing. I think it could be him. I think they're going to look at Cliff Kingsbury pretty heavily, because Cliff is a great offensive mind. I really do believe that. I think that I think from a head coaching perspective, when he was with the Cardinals, I think it was kind of over his head, and like he was, he wasn't ready for that. And I don't even know if he's ready for it now. But given the makeup and this roster of the Bears, this whole entire team, really, like, Cliff could have a lot of fun coaching that. He knows how to get the best from a quarterback. We've seen him with Kyler Murray and how Kyler has looked worse without Cliff. We've seen him with Jaden Daniels, and he's looked wonderful. He, has coached Williams in the past. He's coached Patrick Mahomes, back at both at the collegiate level. So he knows how to work with these mobile quarterbacks, and we're seeing it happen with Jaden Daniels too. So I think that could be an interesting fit. I don't know if it would be my number one choice if I was a Bears fan per se, but I think it would be kind of fun to just watch play out if it were to be Cliff Kingsbury.
I think what the Bears need right now, obviously number one priority is a coach who can develop Caleb Williams. Like, that's obviously top of the list. But very close second is a culture builder, and I don't know if Cliff Kingsbury has
Agreed.
that. I don't know if he can convince the front office that he's capable of doing that. So if I am the Bears, my number one choice is Ben Johnson, just because we've seen the offenses that he can put together. But number 2 probably would have been someone like Mike Vrabel. And now that he's off the table, like, I think all the doors are open. You know, Cliff Kingsbury, I think his odds right now with Vegas are the highest of any potential head coach for the Bears. And I think that's the reason why. He knows Caleb Williams, and they're not going to be able to get what they want from a culture building standpoint, probably. So the next best thing is just someone they feel they can trust to develop Caleb Williams, and he very well might be that. If you're the Bears and you're looking at someone like Mike McCarthy or Cliff Kingsbury, I think the upside is with Cliff, personally.
I would agree. Because just like you mentioned, like the from a culture aspect, if you can't build a good culture, at the very least, you better build up a damn good quarterback. And that's really what they need here. And that's not to say Cliff is going to be a long-term answer for it, and you're not going to hire somebody with the expectation of firing him in 2 years. But if you can coach up Caleb Williams and get him more NFL ready and get him comfortable and kind of teach him how welcome to the NFL should be, then he knows, right? And then you can move on, and you can maybe find somebody who doesn't necessarily need to develop a quarterback, but they need to come in and build that culture. And that's not to say that all falls on the head coach. I mean, obviously that's where it starts. But if you surround yourself with great, coordinators and a great organizational coaching staff, I think that it could still be possible. And so I think Cliff could be fun.
It's interesting because, again, we're sort of playing armchair psychologists because we don't really know any of these people, but you get the impression that if you get like a hard no, if you get a Mike Vrabel or you get, Dan Campbell or Brian Flores, like, you just don't really see those personalities meshing with Caleb Williams.
Yeah.
And, someone like Cliff feels a lot more like the type of coach that would get the most out of Caleb Williams. And you just does. And again, what do I know? I'm just an idiot talking into a computer, but it just seems like that is kind of where their heads are going to be at, that they want a head coach who can, sort of treat the quarterback like a colleague as opposed to a coach-player relationship. And that's what they want, I think. And so that's why Cliff seems very enticing. And I think also Mike McCarthy fits that bill better than a coach like Brian Flores does, right? Or than Steve Spagnuolo does. Like, you don't want to get one of these hard-nosed guys in there that's just going to break Caleb down because he seems kind of fragile from an emotional standpoint. So, like, you want somebody in there who's going to be like a Mike McDaniel and build up your quarterback's confidence and make him feel like he is the best and he can do whatever. And Cliff Kingsbury, I think, fits that bill pretty well. I
would agree. And then, there are a bunch of other head coaching vacancies. The Jets, Saints, Cowboys, Jags, and Raiders. I mean, we could sit here and rub a crystal ball for the next hour and a half and try and map this out and figure out who the best candidates are that we think. I don't want to do that. I don't think our listeners want us to do that. But what I do want to ask you is, if you were to look into that crystal ball, are both Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn head coaches next season?
Yep, I think so.
Certainly
Ben Johnson is. I mean, he's very sought after. And I think Aaron Glenn has a strong case to be made as well. So I think you're going to see that from both of them. We're going to get a few that we haven't even said their names before, like some coordinators that aren't really well known. Steve Spagnuolo comes to mind. He's already interviewed with a couple of teams, and that would just be so annoying to me if we lose him. But certainly he's proven that he's more than capable of being successful. So we're going to get some people that seem kind of out of left field for a lot of NFL fans, but for the most part, the names that we're talking about are the names that are going to go places.
Okay, so let's exclude the Bears in this conversation, and I would specifically want to talk about Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn. Is there any teams that stick out that you think would be great fits for these two gentlemen?
Yeah, it's tough to say. I mean, when I think Ben Johnson, obviously I'm looking at a team with an established quarterback. Secondary concern is offensive line. You want them to have a good quarterback, a good offensive line. Obviously, teams that don't have head coaches are missing a lot of pieces. Like, that's why they fired head coaches. So when I am, from Ben Johnson's perspective specifically, I'm looking at places like the Jags. I'm looking at places.
That's where I have them going. By the way.
And I think New England was an interesting one before that was taken. But you want to go to a place where you feel like you can have some degree of faith in the quarterback, and you're not putting this great offensive mind in a situation where he's got to rebuild from the ground up because we don't know how long or how that's going to turn out. So to me, if the Bears aren't it, The Cowboys are kind of interesting. I think the Cowboys are enticing to any potential head coach just because of the stage. I mean, you're going to be put on a stage that's bigger than any other team in the NFL pretty much, aside from you becoming a Super Bowl contender overnight. So it's like the Cowboys are going to be enticing to pretty much everybody. But if I am Ben Johnson, I'm looking at Sarah Jessica Parker and thinking I can work with that.
That's what I'm thinking. I think there's a pretty good possibility. I've also seen the Raiders. They need a quarterback really bad. They kind of need a lot of things pretty bad, but the Jags got to be kind of enticing because you look at what the Jags are. I've been saying this for a while. I don't think Sarah Jessica Parker is a great quarterback, but I think that you could get a lot more out of him. And I don't think he's the worst quarterback. And I think that you kind of look at the archetype of what Jared Goff is, and I'm like, man, Trevor Lawrence could do that, right? Like, I would put them in a very similar vein, and I think under the right coaching, you could get the best out of Trevor Lawrence and put him in a Jared Goff-esque situation where he can throw a good ball. He's not gonna, he's not gonna win with his legs per se, but when you look at the Lions' offense, and it's like they lean very heavy on the run game. You got Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby back there, and Etienne's been largely absent, but if Ben Johnson goes there, he's going to want to kind of get both those guys involved, kind of like he did with Gibbs and Montgomery. They got a run game going a little bit. You got a decent quarterback. Brian Thomas Jr.'s looked wonderful, so you just kind of need to figure out what your wide receiver... Like, it's a good landing spot offensively, and that's kind of what... If I was Ben Johnson, I'd be looking at this situation saying, I get all this and I get to go hang out in Florida? Maybe not the worst thing in the world, right? Now, the Bears, I do think, from a roster standpoint, are still the most favorable. But given the fact that, the polls drama's been going on, the Bears are also in the same division as the Lions. Maybe he kind of wants to get away from that a little bit. I think the Jags are a really great landing spot for him. And I do think that holds a lot of ground if that's something he might be interested in.
Yeah, definitely. And I just think generally when you're a potential head coach, we ranked them last week, and I still think it holds. I mean, I think the Bears are top of the list because I think the ceiling is through the roof. I mean, that team could be very competitive very soon, assuming that things work out, which, they rarely do for the Bears, but maybe it will. And then New England was right up there, but now Vrabel's got that. And I think the next one on the list is the Jaguars. I mean, they just seem like a relatively, I would much rather be the coach of the Jaguars than the Raiders. I would much rather be the coach of the Jaguars than the Saints, certainly. The Cowboys are still interesting, and I think, Aaron Glenn, might end up with one of those sort of secondary teams where, the Cowboys would be really interesting for a first-time head coach. I don't know if the Cowboys are the best bet, but certainly enticing. So we'll see.
Yeah, and, Glenn is a defensive guy, right? So the Raiders and the Cowboys, to me, for Glenn, kind of would be fun. And the Jets, I mean, really the Saints, the Jets, the Cowboys, and the Raiders, their defense isn't the worst in the world. Like, they've got playmakers on that side of the ball, which he can work with. But the Raiders are really, really interesting to me. I don't know why, but I kind of get the impression that Aaron Glenn could end up with the Raiders, and that could be a decent fit for him. So...
Yeah, I don't know. The Raiders are just, it seems like they just have so many steps to take to get to where they want to be that, I don't know. Being a head coach anywhere would be awesome because you're going to make a whole bunch of money and get your name out there. So I don't think he's going to turn down any of them. But I think the Raiders, the Saints are last on the list for me because of the cap situation. I don't see a way out. But the Raiders are kind of right there. But, you got players like Max Crosby that can give you some juice, and there's a real possibility there. But you're in a division where all the other teams are getting so much better, and the Raiders are just still kind of sitting there. It just doesn't seem good.
Yeah, no. I was going to ask you, and you kind of answered the question already. Which team do you think would be the worst situation to go to? And you said the Saints for the exact same reason I would. That cap situation is screw you, Sean Payton scumbag. It's a really tough place for any head coach to go into because you can't afford to do much, and you're kind of locked to Derek Carr and whatever you can piece together and a 47-year-old Taysom Hill, and it's just like, what is this? Like, I can't do anything. I can't get any players because I can't afford anybody, and you want me to go try and compete out there, and it's tough sledding. So the Saints are definitely probably the worst spot on this list for me. But let's move over to the divisional round preview here, and we're gonna get the hell out of here. So we'll start out with the Texans at the Chiefs. Scotty is a resident Chiefs fan. You taking the Chiefs in this game?
Well, yeah, obviously. Okay. I think the divisional round is always interesting because the number one seeds are now in play, and the number one seeds are obviously going to be the favorites. The Texans looked pretty good in wild card. They looked much more competitive than what they should based on the injuries that they've sustained this year. CJ Stroud kind of stepped back into his last year form where he was just making shit happen and he was elevating the players on the field no matter who they were. So certainly they cannot be underestimated, but ultimately the Chiefs in week 17, the last time they played their starters, looked better than they had all season. And part of it's getting healthier. Part of it is the Chiefs always kind of find a way to turn it on in the postseason. And I expect us to see more of an offensive performance from the Chiefs than we have all year in this game. And I think it's going to be a fun one. I think the Chiefs are going to win relatively decisively.
I also have the Chiefs. I think that I'm going to put a lot of pressure on Spags. I think that Spags is going to defensively put a lot of pressure on CJ Stroud, and I think that's how this game is won. I think that defensively they're going to, we've seen CJ Stroud struggle on and off this season, and his offensive line has been, hurt and lackluster in performance. They looked great last week, but I think that the Chiefs are going to put a lot of pressure on Stroud, and that's ultimately going to be their downfall. So, all right. So we both got the Chiefs here. Commanders at the Lions. It's the Lions, baby. Give me Dan Campbell. They're going to the Super Bowl. Well, we'll see. But I do think that they win this game against the Commanders. It's been a hell of a run for the Commanders this season. I think in this divisional game, this is where it's been a good run, and you will see yourselves come to an end of the road here for the season. The Lions are just so good. The Lions are so freaking good. And the Commanders are good, but I'm not going to say they're great. The Lions are great, and I think that they're going to dominate this entire game. So I'll take the Lions here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the Lions are – we had questions about – I started out for the first 15 weeks of the season saying they're the best team in the NFL. Then injuries started piling up a little bit. There were some question marks, and then they came out in Week 18, and they looked again like the best team in the NFL. I mean, they just absolutely flattened the Vikings, who are also in the conversation for the best team in the NFL, and they demolished them. And in particular, we talked about it then, but the defensive performance that we saw, with all the midseason acquisitions that they had to make and all the changes they had to make, and they just came out and just shut Justin Jefferson down and just shut this explosive offense down. So, yeah, I mean, the Commanders are playing with house money. It almost like they were kind of playing with house money in the wild card matchup too, but if they would have lost to the Bucs, it would have been like, we probably could have done better. But now, okay, they're playing the number 1 seed. They're playing with house money. Like, if they lose, they're still very happy. I think the Lions are real hungry, and I think the Lions are going to run away with this one.
I would agree. This one's fun, Scotty. The Ravens at the Bills. I'll let you, unless you want me to jump on it, I'll give you first lead here.
I have no idea. This is the battle of the MVPs. Both these offenses are awesome. I lean toward Josh Allen and the Bills. I just think they have put together a more complete season. The Ravens have been a little bit more up and down, but certainly if anybody won this game, like, nobody's going to be surprised, obviously. Like, these are two very, very, very capable teams. But I just think that this is kind of Josh Allen's year. I think he's going to make an AFC championship appearance and hopefully lose. But I don't know. As a Chiefs fan, I'm just trying to decide, like, which team I'd rather play. I think I'd rather play the Ravens.
I think you would.
Well, and part of it is just because we've seen Lamar Jackson fizzle out in the playoffs so often. And I think that could be the case this week. I mean, as early as this game, that we just see Lamar Jackson, like, kind of hesitant, afraid to tuck the ball and run. Like, he wants to make smart decisions when it matters most, and that sort of stifles his instincts that make him the player that he is. And we've seen that repeatedly. So it could happen this week, and the Bills could run away. I think I would rather play the Ravens, so I kind of hope the Ravens win. But either way, like, both these teams are very scary.
Yeah, no, you don't want to play either of them, and you're going to have to in the event that you do beat the Texans, which we all do think you will. I think it's the Bills, man. I think this is Josh Allen's year. Ravens there's a chance they're without Zay Flowers again this week, which is a huge detriment to them. And the Bills it's Josh Allen's year, man. And I kind of talked about it briefly earlier, but, like, the Bills didn't have to do anything to win this game last week. They just leaned on the run. Their offensive line has looked really great. James Cook has played really well. Josh Allen he didn't have to play hero ball at all. He didn't have to get crazy. He didn't have to be Josh Allen. He just had to be hand the ball off, kind of get it done, make a couple passes down the field, but didn't have to do anything spectacular. But we know he's capable of it, and I think that's the scary part, is that the Bills really haven't had to lean on him really a lot this season. They've had to at times, but I just think that they're going to get this done against the Ravens, and I think it's going to be the end of the road for the Ravens after this week. So
yeah, Yeah, I'm afraid of the Bills. I'm very much afraid of them. And I got my hopes up a little bit in the first half of this last week, and then they just put their foot on the gas, and it was like, oh yeah, I forgot the Bills can do this, and so they're very scary.
And then we have the last game. It's either going to be the Rams or the Vikings versus the Eagles. What team do you think would be more threatening against the Eagles here?
I think the Vikings. I think the Vikings are the second best team in the NFC. The Eagles certainly have an argument to make there. And they're sort of, I find myself doing this a lot where I just kind of overlook the Eagles. And I think a lot of people have done that this year with all the hype around the NFC North. But like the Eagles are pretty freaking good. So I do think that the Eagles will, I think that they would smoke the Rams. I think the Eagles are just too complete of a team. I don't see the Rams defense being able to stop Saquon Barkley. The Vikings defense makes things a lot more interesting to me. And I think the Vikings would give them a good game. So I guess we'll see. But ultimately, I'm leaning toward favoring the Eagles no matter who they play.
I think Vegas probably would be too, by the way. So I don't think you're off in that calculation. I think I just don't want to bet against McVay. I hate that I like him because he's a division rival of mine, but I really like Sean McVay, and I like Matt Stafford, and I like what they do over there. And, defensive, I agree with you. I think the Vikings defense is much more difficult to stop than the Eagles, but we kind of saw them fold against the Lions, and that's, it's possible, right? Like they've shown that, and don't get me wrong, the Lions offense is incredible, but like they've shown what they can do, and they've shown like this is how we beat them, and we leaned heavy on the run, and I think the Rams might do a little bit better of a job than the Vikings. So it's going to be interesting. Obviously, we'll talk about that next week. But that's it, Scotty. That's all the time we have, my friend. So I appreciate you doing this thing with me, and I appreciate all the Brainiacs out there that have tuned into this entire episode and tuned into us all year. Man, this has been so much fun. It's been a hell of a season. I'm really sad to kind of see it like we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and it makes me kind of sad because then we have the off season. It is,
but you can't think like that. You got to think we're seeing playoff football. This is the best time of the year.
That's true.
Right now.
That's true. I appreciate you refocusing my perspective there.
Yeah. You have to know you're in the good old days before they're the good old days. The Office.
What is it? Dwight?
No, I think that
Michael
was Andy.
Scott. Oh, maybe. Yeah, it was Andy. You're
I think.
Right. Yeah, you're right. All right, buddy. Well, let's get out of here. Last thing I'd like to ask, if you've made it this far, man, leave us 5-star review, man, or any star. Leave us a comment, give us a review, whatever. Like it means so much. And go check out LeatherBrainz.com. We got writers over there that are doing really great work. And then we also have the Fantasy Brain show on Thursdays. I believe Alan's going to be over there this Thursday, so he couldn't make it here on this show, but he will be over on that show with MK doing some good stuff. So tune into that. And I love you guys. I love you guys. Love you, Scotty. Let's get out of here. We are out.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you tune into our new releases every week on your favorite podcast app. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and check out LeatherBrainz.com for all of your fantasy football needs. And remember, Brainiacs, a championship should be more than a fantasy.